The message sat on my phone like a dare. We need to talk. Urgently. It had been a year since the divorce, and my first instinct wasn't anger or curiosity. It was fatigue. The kind that settles into your bones after you've already survived the worst thing you thought could happen to you. I stared at her name longer than I should have. A year ago, seeing it would have stopped my heart. Now it just made me tired. I didn't reply right away. I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie I hadn't worn since the courthouse steps, trying to remember how to look like a man who believed in beginnings again. There was a reservation downtown, soft jazz, low lights. A first date. An actual one. I told myself that mattered. The buzz came again. Please. This can't wait. I don't know why I answered the way I did. Maybe it was the wine already working through my nerves, or maybe it was the quiet, stubborn part of me that was done being available on demand. I typed back, simple and reckless. Another time. I'm on a date with your sister. I set the phone down before I could overthink it. Before guilt or second thoughts could catch up. My hands were shaking, but not with fear, with something closer to defiance. For once, I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't cushioning the truth. A year earlier, I'd been a man unraveling in slow motion. Papers signed, boxes packed, half a life reduced to cardboard and tape. The divorce hadn't been explosive. No screaming matches, no slammed doors. Just a long, quiet erosion. Trust dissolving one unanswered question at a time. By the end, we were strangers who knew each other's schedules too well. People think the hardest part is discovering the betrayal. It isn't. It's realizing how long you convinced yourself not to see it. The late nights that stopped making sense. The way her phone never left her hand. How I learned to sleep through the sound of her coming home after midnight, because asking questions felt like begging. After the divorce, I disappeared for a while. Not dramatically, no cross-country escape, but enough to relearn who I was without the constant weight of disappointment. New apartment. New routines. Silence where there used to be tension. Her sister, Emily, was never part of that old life in a meaningful way. She lived 2 states over, came around on holidays, stayed out of the mess. We'd exchange polite hellos, nothing more. If anything, she'd always looked at me with a kind of cautious sympathy, like she sensed something she couldn't name. We ran into each other 6 months ago by accident. Coffee shop. Same last name called out twice. She laughed first. I remember that. The sound of it surprised me. Light, unburdened. We talked. Carefully at first. About neutral things. Books. Work. Whether that never did what it was supposed to anymore. I told myself it was harmless. That I deserved harmless. When she asked me out last week, I hesitated longer than I want to admit. Not because of my ex, but because of the part of me that still believed I wasn't allowed to want things. So there I was, locking my apartment door, phone silent now, walking into a restaurant that smelled like fresh bread and possibility. Emily was already there, nervous smile, hands wrapped around a glass of water like it was grounding her. You okay? She asked. I nodded, even though my pulse hadn't slowed. Yeah, just first dates, you know. She smiled, softer this time. Yeah, I do. For a few hours, the past stayed where it belonged. We talked, laughed, shared stories that didn't have sharp edges. I almost forgot about the text. Almost forgot the life I'd burned down to survive. When I got home later that night, my phone was face down on the counter. I flipped it over. Missed calls. Voicemails. Her name, over and over, stacked like warnings. I went to bed without listening. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating itself off the nightstand. That alone told me something was wrong. Nobody calls anymore unless it's bad news or panic. I squinted at the screen, heart already picking up speed. It wasn't my ex. It was my brother. Hey, I said, voice thick with sleep. What's going on? He didn't answer right away. I heard traffic, a turn signal clicking, his breathing uneven. Finally, he said, you need to sit down. I already was. That didn't help. She showed up at Mom and Dad's this morning, he continued. Your ex. She's not okay. And she wasn't alone. That sentence landed in pieces. I pushed myself upright. The room suddenly too quiet. What do you mean, not alone? There was another pause. Longer this time. She brought paperwork. Medical records. And she's saying it involves you. My first thought was anger. Not the explosive kind, something colder. A year of silence, of distance, And now she was dragging my parents into whatever crisis she decided was urgent enough to tear open old wounds. I told her I didn't want to talk, I said, more to myself than to him. I know, he replied gently. But this isn't about closure or reconciliation. At least, I don't think it is. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, replaying the last 12 hours. Her message, my reply, the look on Emily's face when I told her, halfway through dessert, that yes, her sister had texted me. How she'd gone quiet, processing faster than I expected. I don't want to be a weapon, she'd said carefully. If this is about hurting her. It's not. I'd interrupted. And I'd meant it. I wasn't trying to win anything. I was just trying to move forward without asking permission. Still, guilt crept in now, unwelcome and familiar. I listened to one of the voicemails I'd ignored. Her voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. That alone unsettled me. She'd never been the type to lose control. Even at the end, she'd stayed composed, distant, efficient. This was different. By noon, curiosity overpowered pride. I drove to my parents' house, rehearsing boundaries the whole way. I wasn't going to be pulled back into chaos. I'd earned my quiet. Her car was there. Seeing it parked in that driveway felt like stepping into a photograph from another life. Same dent in the bumper. Same faded parking sticker she'd never scraped off. For a moment, I stayed in my car, breathing through the tightness in my chest. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and worry. My mother sat stiffly at the kitchen table. My father hovered near the sink, pretending to dry the same mug over and over. And there she was. She looked smaller. Not fragile, just worn down around the edges, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. When she saw me, relief crossed her face so quickly it startled me. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I didn't come to talk," I replied, keeping my distance. "I came to find out why my family is being dragged into this." She nodded, swallowing hard. "That's fair." She slid a folder across the table. My name was on it. Typed. Official looking. I didn't open it yet. "You said it was urgent," I said. "So say it." Her hands trembled as she folded them together. "I didn't know how to tell you. And after your message last night, I realized I might not get another chance." My mother glanced between us, confused and frightened. "Tell him what?" she asked softly. My ex took a breath that sounded like it hurt. "I'm sick," she said. "And the doctors say the timeline doesn't add up the way it should." The room seemed to tilt. I finally opened the folder. Test results. Dates. A line highlighted in yellow. My name appeared again, not as a spouse, not as an emergency contact, as a biological match. I looked up at her, my pulse roaring in my ears. "What exactly are you saying?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I'm saying there's a chance, a strong one, that the reason this matters is because the past you thought was over isn't." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, a single thought kept repeating. This is why it was urgent. I drove home afterward in a fog, the folder riding shotgun like it had weight. Not physical weight, something denser. History. Consequences. The kind of thing you don't outrun just because you've learned how to pack light. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal, trying to line up the facts in a way that didn't feel like a trap. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. That much was clear. There were no speeches, no reaching for my hand, no soft nostalgia weaponized into a plea. She'd been clinical, almost afraid of saying too much, as if the truth itself might break if she handled it wrong. The doctors had found something serious. Treatable, maybe, but complicated. And in the course of testing, they'd uncovered a genetic marker that pointed back to me. Something inherited. Something that couldn't be ignored. "I didn't know," she'd said quietly. "I swear to you. I found out last week." I wanted to believe that. Not because it helped her, but because it helped me. Because if she'd known earlier and kept it from me, it would have rewritten the entire marriage in ways I wasn't sure I could survive revisiting. Emily texted me while I was still sitting there. "Are you okay? You don't have to explain. Just checking in." I stared at her name, feeling the strange split of my life widening. Two timelines running side by side. One rooted in the past I thought I'd buried, the other just beginning to feel real. "I don't know yet," I typed back. "But thank you." Inside, I finally opened the folder properly. I read everything this time. The language was precise, emotionless. Probabilities. Risks. Recommendations. A line near the end mentioned the possibility of a child, unknown to the patient until now. That was the moment my breath caught. A child. Not an accusation. Not a certainty. Just a possibility with enough evidence behind it to refuse being ignored. Memory is cruel in moments like that. It started handing me scenes I'd filed away as meaningless. The years she'd insisted on handling her own medical appointments. The distance that had grown not just emotionally, but physically, in ways I'd blamed on stress. The arguments that never quite made sense because they were standing in for something else. If there was a child, they'd be almost two now. I pressed my forehead into my hands and stayed that way for a long time. That evening, Emily called. Not to demand answers, just to hear my voice. I don't want to complicate things, she said carefully. But I also don't want to pretend this isn't big. It is, I admitted. And I don't know what it means yet. She was quiet, then asked the question I hadn't let myself voice. Does this change who you are to me? I thought about that. About the man I'd been before the marriage. During it. After it ended. About the man who'd gone on a date trying to prove he was allowed to start over. I don't think so, I said finally. But it might change what I'm responsible for. Responsibility. That word had haunted my divorce. Who owed what to whom? What could be left behind? What followed you no matter how clean the break? We agreed to take space. Not distance, space. The kind that lets something breathe instead of suffocating it. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing a small face I'd never met, built from imagination and fear. I kept hearing my ex's voice, stripped of manipulation for the first time, asking for nothing except honesty. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. Ignoring this wasn't an option. And whatever I found next was going to force a choice. One that would reach further into my future than any divorce ever had. The next day, I found out she hadn't come to my parents' house just to tell the truth. She'd come to prepare them. I learned that when my mother called me mid-morning, her voice careful in that way parents use when they're bracing for impact. We met the baby, she said. The word landed wrong. The baby. Not a baby. Not her baby. Ours. They brought him, she continued. Your ex and her sister-in-law. Just for a few minutes. He's sweet. Quiet. Looks like you when you were little. I pulled my car over without remembering making the decision. The world outside the windshield blurred, like my body knew before my mind caught up. There was no dramatic reveal after that. No shouting, no accusations. Just facts lining up into something undeniable. A birth certificate with my last name missing, not replaced, just left blank. A timeline that fit too well. A silence she'd carried alone because she'd been afraid that telling me sooner would sound like manipulation. I didn't want you to think I was using him to keep you, she said later that afternoon, when we finally sat across from each other again. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. Seeing her hold him changed everything in ways I wasn't prepared for. Not because it softened her, but because it sharpened me. He was real. Warm. He wrapped his tiny hand around my finger without hesitation, like instinct knew something my heart was still trying to accept. I didn't feel instant love. That would have been dishonest. What I felt was responsibility settling into place, heavy and irreversible. Emily didn't disappear when she found out. That mattered more than I expected. She didn't compete with the past or demand clarity I couldn't give yet. She just said, whatever you decide, it has to be right. Not easy. She was right. So was my ex, in her own quiet, exhausted way, when she said, I don't expect anything from you except truth. From now on. We're not reconciling. That story ended for a reason. But we're learning how to speak again without weapons. How to sit in the same room and talk about pediatricians and schedules instead of blame. A year ago, I thought the divorce was the end of something. Turns out, it was the beginning of a truth I wasn't ready for yet. I don't know what kind of father I'll be. I don't know where love will land or how long it will take to feel steady again. But I know this. Some messages feel urgent because they are about the past. And some feel urgent because they are about the future you didn't know you already belonged to.